Hi, how are you all? Right. So today we're talking about willpower. Let me get my notes up because I always need to have some notes. Okay. Right then. So should take about 30 minutes or so. I'll try and make it quicker if I can. That's what part of the reason why I have my notes so that I don't waffle on too much because I can. Time just goes too quickly. But willpower's key because it's something that we just sort of can't help thinking about all the time because there's no question, at some point, and I think this is very relevant to what we're going to face over the next couple of months, is a lot of temptation. So therefore, do we need extra willpower to get us through Christmas without giving in to all the food that we know is going to be around and all the social events? So I want to just sort of roll back a little bit and talk quickly about willpower in a very simple sense. It's really about the two aspects of your brain at play when we talk about willpower. You've got your primitive brain that just wants something. So it's very black and white, it's very binary, want this, don't want it. Versus a rational brain, which would, as it sounds, be something that would be making an evaluation over whether something is the right thing for you, if you really want it, if there is a different option. So it's almost like a conversation about between two parts of your brain. So if we are stood in the kitchen and there's a bag of crisps or a packet of open crisps on the counter, primitive brain just is like, yeah, crisps, want crisps, they're great, easy decision. Rational brain is, oh, I shouldn't be eating these. Oh, I'm trying to cut down on saturated fat. Oh, it's not part of my diet, all the rest of it. And it's almost like this sort of wrangling between the two things. Now, sometimes the rational brain can win. Often, as we know, this primitive brain can win. And one of the things that's quite an interesting feature about willpower, it's always, willpower is always something we call upon when we're trying to persuade ourselves to do something we don't want to do. So taking the hard thing. There's no willpower needed to decide to eat a crisp or a biscuit or a chocolate or not go on a walk. They're all really easy things that we can do very simply. We don't want to go without the pleasure of eating something we like, or we don't want to go through with the discomfort of going for a walk when it's raining. So it's the resolve that we always have when we're trying to stop ourselves from doing the easy thing and do the more difficult task or the one that demands a little bit more of us or some sacrifice, etc. And that's quite an interesting thing to think about as well, because a lot of the process that we're going through as we transition to creating a healthier diet and healthier habits, they are things that deep down we know we want to do, but it means that we have to make sacrifices in the short term. So therefore there's discomfort when we're making those changes. So this is why we always, that we've always got this sort of willpower aspect, because we're having to almost persuade ourselves to take the slightly harder option. And something that we do know about willpower that's been scientifically proven that you've probably heard of anyway is this idea that we have a certain amount of willpower when we wake up. So it's almost like currency. It's like money in the bank that we've got that's almost our capacity to make decisions throughout the day. And we can just think about willpower in the sense of resisting temptations from a food point of view. But actually, it's eroded by much more than that. So every time you get a text message or an email, or your children want something, or a colleague wants something, you're having to make a decision about something that you either do or don't want to do. For example, my daughter's off sick at the moment, so she wants me to cook for her. And I'm thinking, oh God, I've got a million and one other things that I could be doing apart from making you dinner. And I don't want to do it, but I sort of have to. So that's actually taking willpower. And I really noticed that. I find it very difficult to get back on with my work, even affecting me having the motivation to make my own lunch, because I've just got this spanner in the works of something else that's calling my attention, that's having to disrupt me from my flow, if you like. But so every little tiny thing that we have, and if you've got a stressful job or a big family or a lot going on, and even the fact that menopause can affect us from a thinking, we can feel more overwhelmed more easily, we can have brain fog, that decision-making process feels very tortuous and very laboured. And therefore, every time we're trying to make a decision, we're just chipping away at that amount of willpower that we have in our willpower reserve that day. And that's quite often why you'll find that you'll get to the end of a long day, and that's when your plans to make a healthy meal goes out the window, or you just really can't resist the temptation of just constant grazing all night. Or when you find, maybe when you've had a very sort of intensely stressful day, you're sort of struggling with cravings before you've even got to the evening because, there's been such upheaval that your willpower's just gone before you even get to the end of the day. And you sort of, your good decision making capacity has just gone and left you. So, and I think that's really a helpful thing to know, that we actually don't have a lot of power over that. And I say that that's a helpful thing because quite often we can be quite self-critical and hold ourselves up to impossibly high standards, that we should be able to maintain this complete decision-making integrity all the way through the day and make perfect choices from the minute we wake up to the minute we go to bed. And when you understand a little bit more about how willpower works, then you realize that's just completely impossible. So I always find these things helpful to know, that as a human, there are limits to what I'm able to do. And that makes it easy for me to go easy on myself when I get to that point in the day when I just can't make a decision. So that said, we want to make changes. We want to be able to push through this discomfort. How do we do it? Okay. And knowing that willpower isn't necessarily a reliable tool for us, we have to sort of look at how we work around it. So we're starting to think about almost saving our willpower for either not relying on it at all. I was going to say save it for when it counts, but actually you don't think you could just rely on that. So it's actually more helpful to think about how we almost bypass that. So we're not having to take that gamble that we'll have willpower when we need it, because odds are we won't. So what do we do instead? So firstly, the key thing that we want to be thinking about is creating routines, because our body, it doesn't just love routines, it actually thrives on routines. So if we've got a routine around exercising at a particular time, going for a walk at a particular time, having regular meals throughout the day, having weekdays that are similar to weekends, or having similar nutritional profile of meals throughout the day and from day to day, then that works fantastically well for our body, and it just can help us function really well. So a couple of things that you just sort of need to think about in terms of how you get to that point of creating those routines. And the first one that I say all the time is talking about meal planning, because what meal planning does, it's putting that structure in place that doesn't need us to have any willpower. Because if you've got a plan on the wall that says what your meal choice options are, or what your meal choices are for each day, you're not having to decide. So you don't need willpower to make a decision about what your lunch is going to be. You might need willpower to make it if you're tired. So that's where it's about knowing yourself, and maybe a little bit of prep, or that being your only option. That means you don't have two choices. So there's things that you then do in terms of your structure and your routine that you can then set up so that you're never in that situation of relying on willpower. And I'm feeling a bit apologetic because I know I bang on about this all the time, but I can't overstate how vital this is, because it really is. Because the reality of it is we're almost planning for a worst case scenario. We're trying to get this structure in place for those car crash weeks. That's what we want it for. There'll be weeks where we actually do we need it? Probably not. But we're not in the routine of doing it then. So when we have that car crash week, everything goes to pot, and we're in this sort of up and down situation of being great and just being dreadful, and we lose that consistency. So this is where that meal planning habit comes into play. So that's essential. And then within that, trying to be I'll come on to something else in a minute, but just firstly, what the key then for those meals. So if we think about top level, we have this structure and routine of planning and creating meals. Okay, that's a sort of an essential thing that we need to do. Second level down is we have to figure out which of those meals, or over time, a set of meals or a little repertoire of meals that fulfill what's called the two S's, and that's satiation, and satisfying. Okay. So what that means is having meals that one, you really find that you enjoy, so you feel fully satisfied after that meal. And the second one is that you feel full, as in your nutritional needs have been met. So you can almost think of it, my nutritional needs have been met and my enjoyment needs have been met. That's how I would think about that. And there's a formula for that as well. And that would be meals that you personally enjoy. And this is where I work with everyone on a one-to-one basis to find the right meals for them. Because what I really enjoy might really just not be something that somebody else enjoys. So that's why it's critical to find the things that truly work for you. So one is the enjoyment. Another area is that feeling of fullness. And this can come from having using a lot of vegetables in your meals to give them a lot of fiber, to make them very filling. That gives you that physical sensation of a distended stomach in a nice sense, where you've got a physical sensation of having eaten enough. It's not just about mentally knowing there's enough calories in that meal or there's enough protein in that meal for me to have enough. It's giving you a different signal that actually there's been a volume that's good. So that's key. So the enjoyment, the feeling of fullness. And then within that is the ratios of protein, because we know having plenty of protein is a big appetite stabilizer and it's good for muscle growth. It keeps you full for a long time. And then there's this volume of veg. So that's our second element. Then the carbohydrates we love. So for me, potatoes is the main thing that I would have as a carb because I can eat a lot of them for a small amount of calories. And then we're adding fat for flavor, for texture, pumpkin seeds or a bit of cheese, oil, butter, small amounts of those sorts of things that can really add to the taste and the texture of the meal. So it's working out that formula of what that food is. And that's a little bit of a discovery process, as you know, because it takes a little bit of time to work that out. But the meal planning is almost a place to start to make it happen. And then on a week by week basis or a meal by meal basis, you're going to just pay attention to which meals you find that you like. And one of the things that's actually quite interesting here that I've talked about a little bit is how much you need to actually change. Now, there can be big changes like seasonal changes where we get to this time of year and quite often we don't enjoy a salad and we want much warmer, more comfort type food. But in terms of the fact that a lot of people can feel under pressure to keep introducing new things all the time, which makes a lot of work for yourself. And it makes it hard to get this stability of almost the nutritional stability in terms of how many of the sort of nutrients that you're having if you're chopping and changing. For example, you might be trying different recipes and it just turns out it doesn't have a lot of protein in, for example. And that means that you end up with a few cravings after. So that's something I just would invite you to think about. How much routine, how much variation do you really need? Because if you can almost bring things down to a fairly tight little, as I say, repertoire of meals that you can have on repeat, it can actually be very beneficial for you in terms of just creating a lot of stability in terms of your energy levels. Your body's expecting what it's getting, so it can help manage hunger. It can help manage appetites. There's a lot of benefits to that. So that's something just to think about the food aspect of it. So in terms of managing, helping willpower, we're trying to get this structure in of really good meals that we're enjoying and that are giving us the nutrition we need so that we're not in that situation of trying to manage cravings and eat lots of snacks and bring our willpower into question or even make decisions on the fly of what we should be eating. So that's why that's important. It's taking away the need for a lot of willpower or for us to rely on it too much. So the next thing to think about, so if the first one is what we're having and that structure, the next one, and this is a really pertinent one now for Christmas, I think, is don't tempt yourself with food you can't have. And we're talking about in your home really primarily, because that's an environment that you have control over. And again, this is for you to make your own decision on, but it's very well known that if we have food that's close to us, that we know is near and that we can see, it's very hard on our willpower to avoid it. Okay, so if I had in my kitchen a jar of nuts on the top, a jar of biscuits and some chocolate on the counter, that would drive me demented. I don't think I genuinely don't think I'd get through the day with being, or anything, I'd eat anything. But that proximity and visibility has a huge influence on us. And even to the point where we're just eating that without even realizing it. So as you go into the Christmas season and you're starting to think about stuff, you've got a couple of choices here. You don't have to buy as much as you think, and some, some people have got children at home, other people haven't got children at home. If you haven't got children at home, why are you buying it if you don't want to be eating it and you want to be eating less of those things? So that's a question I would put to you, because that is something that you have to think about in terms of your commitment to really making changes. You might feel that uncomfortable that you're not buying it. You might worry that you might crave it if it's not there. Or you might be just trying to justify the fact, I'll buy it just in case, but actually you're giving yourself permission to eat it. So that's something I would really sort of have a think about. Don't buy things if you're trying to avoid them, okay? Because you're setting yourself up for failure in that instance. Now, if you have you've got family, or you've got family and friends coming and you're buying all these things for other people, well, then is it for other people or is it for you? And I say this out of an honesty from myself, that I'm often buying things for other people when really it's for me. And, if I know full well, I've talked about my daughter a few times because she's fascinates with it. She's so unbothered about food. But I would be buying things thinking they're for her. She won't eat them. She just forgets they're there, which is quite interesting. So, of course, don't want to waste food. It's down to me again. So that's something I would just think about now. How much do we really want our families and our loved ones to be eating those things that actually aren't good for us? Now, I'm not saying none, but really, do we want a house and a cupboard full of sweets and Christmassy things that is encouraging our children to just keep going, or partners, and just going in and dipping in and out of them all the time? Because I've seen that happen. That's not good for them either. And also, if it's not there, or there's less of it there, they'll just get used to it, So have a think about that. Now, if you do have to have food in the house for other people, then the next thing you can do is think about how you put it out of your sight and out of mind. And that could be putting it in a different cupboard, so it's not in any food cupboard that you would go in. I've given my daughter her own little cupboard so that I can see it, but it sort of feels like I'm stealing her stuff. And that's worked quite well. Other things, so I'm terrible at eating nuts, but I have nuts for my breakfast every day. So I have them in a tub on a high shelf. So if I decide I want to have a nut, I have to go to my cupboard. I have to reach up to the top shelf. I have to get this box down. I have to open the box. I have to then get the jar of nuts out and open the nuts and then eat them. So I'm putting barriers in between me and that food all the time to make it less likely that I will go and eat those nuts. That stops willpower. That makes my willpower, I don't have to think about it, because actually when I have that fleeting thought of I'll go and grab a handful of nuts, I can't be bothered. Whereas when they used to just be in the same cupboard that my tea bags were in, and I had to open the door and pick a tea bag, it was just as easy to get the nuts out at the same time and eat a nut. There was no barrier to me eating them, so I ate a lot more. So those types of things, in terms of how you put those sorts of foods that you're trying to avoid, how you manage your environment to make you not think about them so much and make it a lot of effort to go and get them, you can't be bothered. So they're really effective techniques that work from a psychological point of view. So if you have partners who are making, thinking of someone on the group here, partners who are making cakes, Christmas cakes or mince pies, again, we don't want to be controlling our other people in our family, but we want them to support us with our goals. So if that means those things are in a tin on a high shelf that we can't just sort of go and wander into, then that's actually going to make things a lot easier for us in terms of not having to fight those cravings. And, that is important, because we're trying to make our lives easier at the end of the day. Those cravings will disappear. Well, I forget that I wanted to have those nuts, and I'm doing something else, and it's gone. So we're not imposing any hardship. What we are doing is helping ourselves get close to those goals, and just giving ourselves an easy time. Okay, so that's key. How we don't tempt yourself with food you can't have. Think about how you manage your own environment to make it as difficult as you can to access those things if they have to be in there. But then the question is, do you have to buy it at all? Do you have to buy it as much? Who are you buying it for? Okay. So next thing, again, we've covered this a few times. When we have cravings, it's not a desire for the food necessarily. Think about a craving as a desire for pleasure. That's what we really need. When we strip it all back down, we don't need a sugar fix. We don't need the vitamin C in a bag of crisps. I'm clutching the straws here. We don't need even nuts. I can talk about healthy fats if I want to justify why they would be there. I don't need those extra calories all day. What I need is something to maybe break up the monotony of my day, to give myself a little bit of a rest from the intensity of work, or to help me just relax a bit if I'm just feeling a little bit overwrought. That's what we need. Maybe we need a laugh. Maybe we just need something that's light and easy to do. And what we've done as human beings, and I like to blame society for this because, again, it takes the pressure off judging ourselves too harshly. We've just created this very, very strong association with the need for pleasure and eating, right? It's that simple. And you ultra processed foods, so the things that we tend to crave, like cakes, chocolate, crisps, all of those things, tend to be high in fat, high in salt, high in carbohydrates, sugar. They tend to be the sort of the things that we crave. They're classified as ultra processed foods. And they feed into this association between needing some pleasure and eating, because these foods are very highly palatable. And we get a real strong dopamine hit when we eat them, which reinforces the behavior of, oh, yeah, that is pleasurable. So I need pleasure, eat that. Wow, that ticks the box. Yeah, do that again. And it's really useful to try and sort of take a step back if you can and recognize that when you have a craving, you need something else. And I have talked in other videos about the importance of being able to differentiate between a craving, which is needing for pleasure or habit, versus actually being hungry. If you're hungry, you would be able to think, okay, well, I'll go and make myself something, and that something is healthy, a couple of scrambled eggs, or a little meal, for example. If that type of thing then feels appealing to you, then you know it's hunger. If you're just after a biscuit and you want something sweet, then it's a craving. Okay. So what we have to then think about in that context is breaking those habits, because if you think about it, all cravings, or all of the food, the eating habits, I should say, that we would put into this idea of bad habits that we're trying to break, that we can get cravings for, are based on two things. There's a cue, as in something happens, something is a trigger, and then a response, which is that we eat the food. So the cue would be just that sense of being tired or being stressed. And then the response is that we go and eat. Another cue might be having some stress and struggling to sort of concentrate on our work. Cue, we eat. We go to the cinema, we automatically have popcorn. We put the TV on, we automatically want to have a bag of crisps. We have, biscuits with our tea. We pass the coffee shop on our way on the school run, and on our way back, we stop in for a coffee and a pastry. Okay, so that's what's happening. So anytime we have a craving, there's going to be those two things, a cue and a trigger. So if we start to think about this now, what can we do? We can either break the cue, or we can substitute the response. Okay, so what I mean by that is, if you went to school, you might go a different way to school that doesn't pass a coffee shop. So you're not going to pass that coffee shop where you always stop, and that can be enough to break the habit. But then, for example, if you like to sit down and have a cup of tea and a chocolate bar, sit down and watch TV, you're never not going to stop watching TV. So it's not realistic to think about how we we stop the trigger happening, because we're going to keep. So we have to look at then breaking the response, and that becomes substituting that chocolate bar for something else. Okay. Now, one of the things that I just sort of want to sort of just step to the side on really is, just to remind you that we have, as human beings, we're able to choose, we're able to make decisions. And that's just something to remind ourselves of when we're starting to think about how we manage our willpower, or how we work around our willpower limitations, and how we can make choices and create new habits and break bad ones. So we do have an opportunity to choose. Now, it can be difficult to do, but it's worth trying to remember, because we do have a choice of whether or not something is worth it. Is it worth the calories? Am I going to enjoy this, or am I just eating it for the sake of it? We can start to become more aware of those things. And that can be sort of a more of a gradual process. But certainly it's something I just want to throw in here at this point, because we can choose. And you may find already that you have done that. I hear about people going out for lunch and realizing they didn't need to eat all the chips that came on the plate. They've made a choice. That's all it is. Or you might have gone to your normal cafe and realized that you didn't feel hungry enough to have the cake, so you didn't bother. You've made a choice. An hour later, is anything different in your life? Absolutely not at all. Excuse me. And then behind that idea of having that choice is this want you to feel empowered as people. So this is why when I'm doing my coaching with you, I'm never saying you can't have this, you can't drink, you can't eat sugar, you can't have Christmas things. This is about you making your own choices, because we're all grown-ups. So it's empowerment. It's being clear about what you want and setting those boundaries in your own life. And that just takes a little bit of time to, that just takes a little bit of time for you to maybe get that skill or work out what it is. But quite often when we think about all the things we eat, people are quite surprised when I actually challenge them to think about what do they most enjoy. It's a fraction of the things that we routinely eat as snacks. And when you start to notice that, you'll think, oh, right. Well, yeah, I'm not as bothered about crisps as I thought it was. One of the things that it was a long time ago, but I never bought into buying juice, because once I grew up on it, of course, like most people probably did, and then I realized how many calories were in juice, and I just thought, well, I don't even notice I'm having them. They're just not worth it. So I just switched on to water and tea, and it just didn't take me a minute, because I just thought there's just no point to have that. I'll never think that about chocolate, because chocolate is something I genuinely enjoy. And that's the type of choices that we can then start to make, where we become a little bit more discerning about what is or isn't worth it to us, based on how much enjoyment it's going to give us. So that's sort of really key. So we do have a choice. Sometimes it's hard for us to make that choice when we're locked in this willpower battle and our willpower reserves are depleted, and we're really stressed. We're really under a lot of stress and pressure. But we can start to become more familiar with our choices and be more discerning in the moments where we're not under that pressure, because then it's a way of us getting to know ourselves a bit more, and it makes it easier for us to then call upon that decision-making process further down the line. But let's pretend we're not trying to break the cue, or we can't choose. What we then want to start to think about is, how do we then displace those negative habits? So how do we substitute that unhealthy thing that we have with a healthier option? And that actually is more successful than trying to break a habit. So if you like to sit down and have, you have like a chocolate bar in front of the TV after a hard day's work with a glass of wine, that can be a very hard habit to break. But what you might find you have more success with is maybe switching to a cup of peppermint tea and a couple of chocolate bars. Now, that even saying that and as someone who doesn't drink, that sounds like a very boring swap. But believe me, you can try and do that for a few days, and you will start looking forward to that, and that works. So it might be, if you always like to have a dessert after your meal, then instead of trying to sort of, go without one and just feel that's, a hard habit to break, you start having something like a couple of spoonfuls of Greek yogurt with some strawberries. That's much lighter, still has the nice natural sweetness, still something that you can eat. And then you'll start to crave the strawberries and the Greek yogurt, and it's a much healthier option. So that's something that we can then look at and see how we displace those habits. And one of the things that then we can think about in the context of that when we're going into Christmas is we have an opportunity now to not create new habits for Christmas, because at the moment we're not routinely eating mince pies every day. We're not routinely sticking our hand in a tin of celebrations and having, one sweet's got 70 calories in, but who doesn't have 10 or 15 when they're there and you dip it in, and that starts to do damage. Or that we're routinely buying all the brown stuff in the supermarkets when they're in offer and having that at home. So we've got the opportunity now to not get into those routines and those habits of letting those less healthy Christmas foods become too big a part of our lives over the next couple of months. Even if I was a terrible one when I worked for being the person to go and buy stuff to bring it in for other people. Gave me the opportunity, being people pleasing, it's what that was about, and it gave me the opportunity to keep eating them as well. So don't be that person if you're like me. I'm sure you're not, but we can think about now what habits we create over the next couple of months as we go into that season, and obviously make some choices when we're in this empowered phase of not doing some of those things. And then the last thing I want to talk about from a context of willpower is the power of reflection. And I talk a little bit about journaling, but something that's been proven as well, is the power of reflection in helping to create new habits and break old habits. So you might have heard things like it takes 21 days to create a new habit. And that's actually not true. It can take much longer than that. It can take as long as a year in some cases when they've done some studies. I don't know if you read Atomic Habits. That was a great book, but that talked about how long it actually took to create habits. And that type of thing is done through repetition and routine and creating a way of making sure that you do that same thing day in, day out. But another thing that's a really powerful tool is reflection. So if you then have a day where you manage to substitute your wine and your chocolate bar with peppermint tea and 2 squares of dark chocolate, for example, that becomes a much better option, or you switch your dessert out, taking a little bit of time with a journal to reflect on how that made you feel. You didn't notice it after an hour. You felt less guilty. You relaxed and enjoyed your evening just as much. And thinking of all the positive things that you've noticed about doing that can go a long way to really reinforcing those positive behaviors. So that's part of why I'm a really big fan of journaling in the context of what we're doing on this program, because it really can help you to crystallize in your mind why these new habits or these old habits are worth making or breaking, and how you're benefiting as a person from them. So rather than just thinking we're not having something, we're actually starting to think about the benefits of not having them, and that has a huge impact on reinforcing those new behaviors. So I hope that gives you some tips and ideas about willpower, and particularly going into this season now. And I would just maybe take a little bit of time, if you have it, after listening to this, to maybe start to jot a few things down in terms of thinking about what you want to avoid, or what strategies you can do to change things around over the next 2 months. And that might include what you buy, where you put it, whether you don't buy things, what new alternative habits you could create instead of defaulting to the obvious ones. So just have a think about that, because I think that would help you. It's like almost part one of you getting your pre-Christmas plan together. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for your time today. And if there's any issues on any of this, you can or questions that you have, just drop me a line. I'll always answer them. If it sparks something that you want to have a chat about, then just let me know and we can have a call. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day and see you soon. Bye.